Deep in the Himalayas, on the western edge of the Tibetan plateau, lies Ladakh, one of the highest and driest inhabited regions on Earth. Scorched by the sun in summer, frozen solid for 8 months of winter, this is a place that might seem incapable of sustaining human life. Yet over the centuries, fields have been carved out of the rocks and sand of the desert, enabling the people not only to survive, but to prosper. But the face of Ladakh is changing.
Agriculture is dying. Most people are coming out of agriculture.
The modernization of Ladakh calls into question a number of widely held assumptions about industrial society. In fact, it challenges us to reassess the whole notion of progress. Helena Norberg Hodge has spent much of the last 18 years in Ladakh.
I know it might sound far-fetched, but I'm convinced that looking at Ladakh can actually help us to better understand what's going on in the West. When I first went to Ladakh, there was no pollution, no crime, and people had lived peacefully side by side for centuries. And there was an incredible joy to life. But now in recent years, I've seen the impact of the modern Western world on the traditional culture. And this ability to contrast the old with the new clarifies a lot of things. It helps to explain the reasons behind many of the problems that we face in the West, the reasons behind environmental breakdown and the breakdown of communities, and more importantly, it helps to show how we might get out of this mess that we've created.
An independent kingdom until the mid-1800s, Ladakh is today part of the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. Its cultural heritage is Tibetan, so much so, in fact, that it is still widely known as Little Tibet. While parts of Ladakh are largely Muslim, the predominant religion of Central or Old Ladakh is Tibetan Buddhism. In area, Ladakh is almost the same size as England, but supports a population of only 130,000, the vast majority of whom live as farmers in small villages. Since there are less than 4 inches of rainfall a year, the Ladakhis have to rely instead on glacial meltwater, which is brought to the fields through an elaborate system of channels, often many miles long. cultural traditions have limited population growth and helped to ensure that the natural carrying capacity of the land is not exceeded. More than 90% of Ladakhi families own their own land, an average of 3 or 4 acres, and a number of animals. Land holdings are neither sold nor divided, but passed on intact from one generation to the next.
아피 매매 차오 차모 창마냐보 둑성랑 직자 디제노 차오 차마 디제노 디제노 나마 부사사 라스트 존에 신강벨라
장능도 멀티가 되는 독시 정부 직진나 젠테 라 정말 직지스코스 감도 정말 멀티가 꽤 독한인 줄이야만아.
Villages lie between 10 and 14,000 feet. At this altitude, the growing season is extremely short. Nonetheless, local varieties of wheat and barley produce plentiful yields year after year. Each family also keeps a small vegetable garden, and at lower elevations there are orchards of apple and apricot trees. With few exceptions, basic needs are met within the community. Houses are made from the resources of the immediate environment: stone for the foundations and ground floor, and sun-dried bricks made of mud and straw. Dwellings are large and graceful, yet there's no need for architects. Everyone in Ladakh knows how to build a house. Self-reliance is based on skills which are finely tuned to the local environment. During the summer, villagers spend time at the high pastures watching over their animals. At 16,000 feet, conditions are harsh, but these local breeds of sheep and goats are well adapted to the environment. Vegetation here is scarce, so the herds are moved each day to prevent overgrazing. This is an almost timeless life. Work and leisure are one.
Låt samson till ballkaltis på namla.
Taiwan 지수 제시했는데.
두고 인자는
원하니 스그레 셔드나 같이네. 내가 럽시한테.
뭐 각선인데.
마이나리기나. 하스미나리.
말람 나야 럽션 바코테 찍찍할 파텐득스 럽션스. 럽션. 원하니 기타 써나.
이나 칼피나리.
나 잡이 선데스스핀 마년.
마이나리.
Over the generations, the Ladakhis have learned to make the most of the resources around them. Almost everything that grows wild is gathered and put to use for fodder, food or medicine, fence making or basket weaving.
People, they don't waste anything in Ladakh. whatever it may be. So it may be wood, it may be even stones, it may be grass, it may be water, it may be anything. You see, they don't waste it. They take care of it. You see, in that way, we could really see, you see, that Ladakh are actually very economist. They're the real economists, you see. Not the modern economics, as you see, increasing in production, go on producing things, you see, destroying all the natural resources. Not like that. You see, it's, taking care of the natural resources and how to develop it.
Everyday life in the village is based on a close relationship between people and the earth. This living experience of interconnectedness is reinforced by the teachings of Buddhism. The religion permeates all aspects of life. Almost every village has its own monastery. Most households have a family member at the monastery, and there is constant interaction between villagers and monks. Within each house, there is a private chapel. The landscape is dotted with stupas or chortens. These monuments represent the essence of Buddhist philosophy, the interdependence of everything in the universe. At the top of the stupa, a crescent moon cradles the sun, symbolizing the oneness of all life. Even the sun and moon, which seem so far apart, are inextricably interrelated. Tashi Rabkes is a poet, philosopher, and Ladakh's leading Buddhist scholar.
Interdependence is very important, you see, in the Buddhist philosophy, because you see, it says that everything depends on every other things. You see, even things come into being through dependence and through relationship. See, the animals depending on plants, and plants in turn depending on soil, water, air, the basic elements. See. And human beings depending on animals and plants and other things. So all are interrelated and interconnected.
Agricultural work is founded in cooperation. Labor, animal power, and farm implements are routinely shared.
In that way, the farming is done. See, and it is done in a very cooperative basis, you see. They will go to the neighboring families, you see, that some people should come to help us. So they will come, to see. And in return, you see, this family who does the job has also, so some of the members of that family have to take part in, see, in the case of another family. See, no money is paid, see, no cash or nothing. Only now, see, food is served.
The small scale of the economy helps to strengthen community ties. People have the security of knowing that they can depend on one another. The spirit of mutual support is especially evident in the distribution of water. Over the centuries, a system of sharing has been developed, which determines when each household can divert the main channel to its fields. The animals of the entire village are tended by just a few villagers at a time, sharing the work on a rotational basis. Ladakhi families support each other in a more formalized way as well, through an institution called the Paspun. Each family belongs to a group of households that help each other at the time of birth, marriage, and death. Occasions like these bring together large numbers of villagers, and they all have to be provided for. When someone dies, the Paspun takes care of all the necessary arrangements, from washing and wrapping the body to the performance of rituals in the home. Their work helps to lighten the burden on the family and to give people a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. Even at the time of greatest sorrow, the individual is never alone.
Death is very quite natural. When there is birth, there is death. In Ladakh, the people who follow Buddhism, they accept that when someone dies, someone again takes a rebirth.
While most work within the village is undertaken at family level, some larger projects, like the rebuilding of irrigation canals or major pathways, involve the community as a whole. In communities of this scale, people know that helping others is in their own interest. Village-level decisions are taken by a council made up of representatives of chutso, or groupings of 10 or so households. Although most of the formal decisions are taken by men, women in Ladakh enjoy a remarkably high position. Almost all the important decisions affecting people's lives are taken at the household level, where women are at the center. Harvesting involves the whole family. Neighbors and friends also join in as part of a time-tested system of reciprocity. In fact, harvests are often staggered, so that several families, even from different villages, can work together.
Even the small children, they also go to the field, and old people, now old people, they will give good advice, they will supervise how it is going on, and like that.
This is the most critical time of the year, since the crops have to be gathered in quickly before the first snows. Even so, the work goes on at a relaxed pace. Agriculture in Ladakh is based on human and animal power and handmade tools. The most advanced technology is the rantak, a simple water-powered mill for grinding grain. Yet in the 4 months between the spring and autumn frosts, the Ladakhis managed to produce more than enough food for the entire year. In most years, there's even a sizable surplus of grain that can be traded for salt or tea or even jewelry. And there's enough barley to make into gallons of chang, the local beer. Long breaks are part of a typical day in the summer working season. With the harvest over, hardly a week goes by without a party. Singing, dancing and music that involve the whole community. Weddings last many days, even weeks. Even religious events take on a festive air, particularly the annual cham dances, which are held at the bigger monasteries. The dancers are all monks. The dances they perform are dramatic enactments of Buddhist philosophy. Life in Ladakh is clearly more than mere subsistence. This is in fact a rich culture, one in which people are able to meet not only their material needs, but more importantly, their need to belong, both to their place on the earth and to the community of which they are a part.
It's important not to idealize traditional cultures. In Ladakh, for instance, there was high infant mortality and it was very cold in the winter, and people certainly weren't as comfortable as we are in the West today. But if you look at what's important, then the traditional culture really worked. It was sustainable. People had managed to live in this difficult environment for centuries, and people were really happy.
For the last 2 decades, Ladakh has been increasingly exposed to modern influences. Roads now link the region to the Indian plains, bringing the Ladakhis not only material goods, but Western notions of progress. In the capital, Leh, a range of consumer goods is now available. And for many Ladakhis, life is becoming less physically demanding. However, modernization is undermining the very foundations of the traditional culture and giving rise to an all too familiar pattern of potentially devastating environmental and social problems.
With this phenomena, the whole value system is crumbling. All the values are dwindling, and it has become very difficult for the people to keep to the ancient values.
Leh is now growing exponentially as the new economy encourages people to leave the land in pursuit of paid employment. Housing colonies sprawl into the desert, unconnected to the resources around them. There are no streams here. Residents have to depend instead on deliveries by government trucks. The physical environment of Leh is deteriorating year by year. The thin air is being choked by the diesel fumes of trucks and buses that now pour into the capital every day. Rubbish of all sorts piles up in the streets and on the open dumps on the edge of town. In the traditional village, rubbish is unknown. Everything comes from the earth and goes back to the earth. Even human waste is composted and used as fertilizer on the fields. In Leh, sanitary facilities are almost non-existent. The few flush systems that exist not only put a strain on scarce water supplies, but tend to be poorly constructed. Leaking septic tanks are becoming a major source of contamination. Water from streams in and around the town is no longer fit to drink.
Tisuk mani mafang tisuk phangna ka to emma dikpa ino zerte da dikpa zik something ngan mi un kasu kela kya chur sangma borche se pe dik thabne ma korte te vejaste mi guni tene chute thame na mane hak tu mane phangche man chiese na ibu dikpa jigi no zerte.
Waterborne diseases, including hepatitis, which is almost unknown in the traditional village, are now a serious problem. In the past, Leh was at the hub of a self-reliant economy. its essential needs were met from relatively nearby.
ngaja chung zane ngaje kampa pakpe mane rashan ne kyong abidok chu marnak mane ngaje bazar ne kyong rang bos rang kampa ne dindo.
Today, the people of Leh are becoming dependent on outside sources, not just for luxuries and consumer goods, but for basic necessities like food, clothing, and energy.
Development in Ladakh, and it's the same everywhere in the world, is a process of planned change. And what it's done is to systematically dismantle the local economy, local self-reliance, and the first victim is the small farmer, whose entire livelihood is completely undermined.
As a result of heavy subsidies, wheat trucked in from the other side of the Himalayas sells in Ladakh for considerably less than wheat grown 5 minutes walk away. Local agriculture is made to seem uneconomic. There's little incentive to continue farming. In the short term, cheap imported food might appear to be a real benefit, but the result is that the Ladakhis are being increasingly tied to a global economy, putting them at the mercy of market forces far beyond their control. In the traditional economy, a kilo of barley is a kilo of barley. Yields are quite consistent from year to year, so the family's livelihood is secure. People know that they will always be able to provide for themselves. The situation in the money economy of Leh is very different. A kilo of barley might cost 3 rupees one year and 6 rupees the next. Moreover, supplies of imported goods are far from reliable. For 2/3 of the year, the passes linking Ladakh with the rest of India are closed by heavy snows. Stockpiles built up over the summer are often depleted before the end of winter. Staple foods and kerosene, which is now widely used for cooking, are both rationed. Competing for scarce resources inevitably leads to friction. What's more, the very bureaucratic distribution system contributes to a new sense of inferiority and inadequacy. In the traditional society, people were largely in charge of their own lives. Nowadays, more and more decisions, even decisions affecting everyday life in the village, are made in distant government offices. As the focus of the economy shifts to Leh, families are splitting into ever smaller nuclear units. There's no room for grandparents in houses like these, either physically or emotionally. In the new money economy, traditions of cooperation have lost their meaning and are fast disappearing.
In the past, we were very much dependent on each other. We really used to have some feeling for each other because we were dependent. I was worried that when I have some problem, my brother would help. And now, when the people have money, even for among ourselves, we don't depend on it. You know, if we need something, we say go and get from the market.
The whole relationship has become very superficial. If there is some strain, some strain and stress, then this relationship doesn't hold.
Even in the villages, the old system of shared work is breaking down. Mutual support is giving way to more individualized concerns, based largely on money. The health of the land is being threatened by modern methods of agriculture, which are now being widely promoted as part of the package of Western-style development. More than 3/4 of the pesticides used in Ladakh have been banned or severely restricted in the West. Paradoxically, the process of modernization is also robbing the Ladakhis of time.
Traditionally, people in Ladakh had a lot of time for enjoying themselves. They worked at a very relaxed pace, even though the technologies that they had were very slow. What I've seen now is that development is actually speeding life up. Suddenly people have to work at the speed of the available technologies. A friend of mine from a remote village pointed this out very vividly. She said, I just can't understand what's happening. My sister who lives in the capital, she's got all these things that save time. She's got a kerosene stove, she's got a telephone, they have a Jeep, and yet when I go to visit them, they barely have time to talk to me.
As traditional patterns of community are eroded, a new sense of divisiveness comes into being. Crime and violence are increasing year by year. So too is ethnic friction.
The relation between Buddhist and Muslim in the past was very good. Say, about 10 years back, we had very good relation. But then I feel personally in about last 5 years or 6 years back, the relation started deteriorating. And right now the relation is quite strained and quite bad. It's not very likable relation.
The position of women suffers too. Now typically the man of the house will go off to work in town, leaving his wife to spend the day at home alone, cut off from the center of the new economy. A household's wealth is no longer measured in terms of its capacity to provide for itself from its own resources, but in its buying power. Today, the gap between rich and poor is growing, and for the first time, some Ladakhis cannot even afford a place to live. Why is it that the Ladakhis allow their way of life to be so degraded? Helena Norberg Hodge believes that it has to do with the psychological pressure to modernize.
In one of my first years in Ladakh, I was in this incredibly beautiful village. All the houses were 3 stories high and painted white, and I was just amazed. So out of curiosity, I asked a young man from that village to show me the poorest house. And he thought for a bit, and then he said, we don't have any poor houses. The same person I heard 8 years later saying to a tourist, oh, if you could only help us Ladakhis, we're so poor. And what had happened was that in the intervening 8 years, he'd been bombarded with all these one-dimensional images of life in the West. He'd seen people with fast cars, looking as though they never worked, and with lots of money. And suddenly, by comparison, his culture seemed backward and primitive and poor.
Throughout the summer, foreign tourists descend on Leh in their thousands. In their own countries, they may not be especially wealthy, but here they appear to be fabulously rich, spending more in a day than a whole Ladakhi family might in a year. Nor do they seem to have to work for that money. The impression they give is that life in the modern world is clean, easy, and trouble-free. Some of the tourists, in turn, treat the Ladakhis as little more than objects. The overall impact can be a devastating loss of self-esteem. Films, and more recently television, have served to reinforce the notion that West is best. by purveying images of glamour, luxury, and endless leisure, with machines to take the place of human labor. Moreover, they generally present polarized images of sexual roles. The women tend to be passive and concerned mainly with appearances, while the men are aggressive and macho and glorify violence. These stereotyped images find expression in the new toy shops. Among the most popular items, blonde Barbie dolls and gun-toting Rambos. Young people, and young men in particular, are most strongly affected by these new influences and tend to be dismissive of their own culture.
It's the teenage boys that are the weak link in the culture, and I think this is true around the world. And you can see that the culture that's coming in is actually a teenage boy culture. It has fast things, racing through the countryside on a motorcycle or having guns that go bang. This appeals to teenage boys, but to nobody else.
As a direct result of development, the Ladakis are losing their old sense of self-confidence, of self-worth. In an attempt to live up to the modern Western image, they are alienating themselves from family and community and becoming increasingly insecure. In the long term, one of the most serious threats to the culture and local economy comes from education. Generally, schools are considered to be among the unqualified benefits of development. But what's happening in Ladakh calls into question what we really mean by education. In the traditional culture, children learn from experience. They learn how to grow food, how to build houses, how to make clothes. And they learn about the values which have supported the Ladakhi way of life over the centuries. By contrast, modern education trains children at best for specialized jobs in urban centers. But these jobs are scarce. Increasingly, education is training people to be unemployed. In Ladakhi schools today, children learn nothing about their own culture or about local resources. Instead, they follow a curriculum based on the Western industrial model. Even the language is foreign.
I appreciate the poetry of Wordsworth.
If a child here is taught, he or she is taught in Urdu, a language totally alien to Ladakhis. Their parents wouldn't speak a word of in the villages. More unbelievable is that after these 8 years, you have to go to English abruptly as a medium of instruction,
Zinat, what do you say? When wealth is lost, nothing is lost. But when health is lost, something is lost. But character is lost, everything is lost. Yes, when health is lost, something is lost. When character is lost, everything is lost.
School books extol the virtue of Western-style development. This English reader contains an example of a letter which a child in India might write to a pen pal in Japan.
Enarts are building a large number of dams so that our farmers can bring many millions of acres of land under cultivation.
The school books teach them, for example, how to make tea. And they can easily produce that back in their answer books. You see, first boil the water, then put the tea leaves and put the milk and things. But they can only write that on paper. They cannot make tea.
We have a think of building up many more industries so that we may be able to produce all the things we need in our country. These industries are changing our way of life.
And then after 2 years of this English, you have to face the main examination, that is the passport to jobs or further studies. And students fail here in their hundreds. About 90%, 95% fail every year.
We have very little land left in our village now. Many families are moving to cities and towns in order to find jobs in factories and industries. More and more people every year leave their village and flock to the industrial towns.
When they fail, they are really in trouble, you see. They cannot go back to the traditional life and start doing farming and other things because they are so confused, they don't know anything because they have been kept away. And they are rejected by the modern sectors. So they belong to none of these, you see. They are rejected by the modern, they are cut off from the traditional.
You are sensory Ashok.
The modern school system separates children by age and increasingly by ethnicity.
For example, we have got one school, Lamdon school, run by the Buddhists. There's one Islamia public school run by the Muslims. There's a mission school run by the Christians. So this is really taking the different communities' children in different groups, and they never get a chance to intermix, and they get a feeling that the other sect of people are something which cannot be made friendly.
One of the effect of modern education is so that it makes people very aggressive. And one of the strange things is that in the newspapers and in the media, people are always using the words fight. Yeah. You have to fight this and you have to fight that. The fighting is not a good thing. Why you fight? Why isn't there any other way to solve the problem?
With the children off at school, life on the farm becomes harder for the rest of the family, especially for women.
Dinama silit, chupa, dur gupa, dor getpa, chik chupa, chik sikolayot, chupa thoni, chik chujipa engineer layot. Yani mana mi met ngana chik chingoni. Aba mata re no mulazim yamet. Du ye ta chupa mata re. Na mata re. Du nga ye dia.
When viewed from a broad perspective, the impact of development has been profoundly disturbing. Modernization is no doubt bringing some short-term material benefits. But in so doing, it is unraveling the rich fabric of relationships which held Ladakh together over the centuries. It is polluting the environment, breaking down community, and eroding personal identity.
In one way, in spite of all the material progress, all the inventions, and all the knowledges, if we really look to the human situation, and I think they are more miserable now.
We tend to think of development as something that is just going on in the so-called third world. But actually, from what I've seen, going back and forth between Ladakh and the West over many years, it's clear that it's a process that is going on in the West too. It's just that here we call it progress and treat it like some sort of evolutionary force beyond our control.
The changes brought about by development in the industrialized world have been occurring over a very long period of time, dating back to the Industrial Revolution and beyond. As a result, it's hard to see the connections between the problems we now face and their original root causes. In Ladakh, the changes have been so sudden that the causal connections are much clearer. It's here then that Ladakh can perhaps teach us something about ourselves.
I think the most important lesson of Ladakh is that people need to feel connected. They need to have a relationship with the place where they live, with the earth under their feet. And they also need to feel part of a community, to actually form their sense of identity through long-term relationships with other people.
In the old culture, these relationships are made possible by the scale of everyday life. Political and economic units are small enough that people can actually see the impact of their actions on the world around them. What's more, they are able to be directly involved in making decisions that affect their lives. In the traditional village, the individual is part of a web of supportive relationships, from the extended family to groups of neighboring households, to the paspun, to the village. This is human scale. As the scale of life grows, community ties are weakened and competition increases. In the industrialized world, the scale is now so big that within today's anonymous cities and sprawling suburbs, the actions of the individual can easily appear to have no connection whatever with the welfare of the population as a whole. And yet the scale continues to grow.
One thing we should be learning from Ladakh is the value and the importance of the local economy, the local community. But around the world, the trend is in exactly the opposite direction. Everywhere the push is towards larger markets, larger scale, and the globalization or the internationalization of the economy is making it impossible for the small shopkeeper and the small farmer to compete. So just like in Ladakh, where farmers can't compete with subsidized wheat that's been brought in over the Himalayas on roads that are themselves subsidized, in the same way, the small shopkeeper and the small farmer everywhere in the world can't compete with things that have been mass-produced on a large scale.
The example of Ladakh forces us to reassess what we mean by wealth. In the traditional way of life, there are almost no monetary transactions. So conventional economists would rank these people among the poorest of the poor. As a consequence, moving from a house like this to one like this is considered an unequivocal improvement. Someone in this house will be making a cash income, and even if it's only a few dollars a day, that's seen as good for the economy and therefore better than what they had before. Economic accounting in the West is no less absurd. According to the narrow way we measure growth, our national balance sheets are healthier if we buy vegetables, for instance, that have been grown thousands of miles away and trucked across the country, than if we buy them from a nearby farm. All the broader long-term costs, from the subsidizing of transport infrastructures to the impact on the environment, are completely ignored.
One thing that I see very remarkable in Ladakh is that anything they do, they rate it, they weigh it in terms of what it will be for generations, yeah? What it will be for their children and grandchildren. We have a common phrase like, how it will be for our tatu, means how it will be for our precious children.
In Ladakh, the emphasis is on the interconnectedness between everything, including our interdependence with life. The emphasis is that we're part of an interdependent web of relationships.
The Western way of looking at the world is grounded in modern science, which today has come to dominate all other forms of knowledge.
The people want to become specialists, experts in one subject or another. So in that field, their mind or their brain is quite clear. They're full of light. But then the remaining part of their mind is totally dark.
Science has clearly led to some very impressive technological achievements. But the interaction between technology and one-dimensional economic thinking has produced a range of serious unforeseen consequences, both environmental and social.
I see this distinction between cleverness and wisdom. Cleverness is when you are very sharp in your head and you can make wonders out of it. But then wisdom is beyond that. This wisdom of seeing what is useful and what is harmful for your future, irrespective of how advantageous it is for you right now. This is a difference, I think, from the rest of the world, and this is something that Ladakh can contribute to others.
As compared to the modern times, the people in the past, they were very happy, you see. They were very close to the reality, you see, the basic truth. See, now people have become very much complicated, so therefore they are not happy, you see. They're getting more money. They're having all sorts of technologies. In one way, you see, their life has become very comfortable. But comfort and luxuries, these things don't bring happiness.
If Ladakh teaches us anything, the lesson is that we need to move towards a more ecological, community-based way of life. We can't go back to living like the Ladakhis, but we can strive to re-establish our connection with each other and with the earth.
Soon